I always thought Canada was a foreign country, our friendly neighbor to the north, but still a different country, and I think Canada should decide what's best for Canada. Here's the problem, as I see it, for any country. You can say that you don't want Huawei in. There are good national security reasons to have that attitude, but you need an alternative. You need a substitute company that is making the most sophisticated, advanced equipment in the world to build 5G networks. Now, you have great carriers, meaning telephone companies, wireless companies, cable companies, but they need to buy the equipment from someone. So if not Huawei, you have to have an alternative.
In the U.S., we've seen, of course, these more rural networks being asked to remove the equipment. Is that the right approach? The U.S. has said we don't want any of the Huawei or ZTE equipment in there. Get it out. Is that fair?
It isn't that it's fair, it's that there has to be an alternative.
Right.
Meaning, I do understand for a variety of reasons why there are legitimate national security concerns about Huawei, but there has to be an alternative. And I fault the U.S. government, stretching back over a number of years, not just the Trump administration, for not developing a cogent, sensible business alternative. Now, you can say that it's Ericsson, you can say that it might be Nokia, you could say let's rebuild the company that used to be part of AT&T and became Lucent. You can say whatever you want to say, but you have to have a plan.
And why can't we say those things? In other words, we do see the major carriers building out 5G. They seem very happy. I've talked to some of them with Ericsson, with Nokia. Can we not just say that's perfectly good equipment? We'll go with that.
You could go that way, but those are not companies that the United States would regard as American flag companies. They may have offices here, they may have employees in the U.S., but they're not really American flag companies. So if the U.S. is going to embrace that point of view, it's going to have to be globalist. It can't be just make America great. It has to be make the whole Western world great again.
But so to your point, just to be clear on what you're saying, there is no American equipment provider of this stuff. Are you saying that America should focus on getting an equipment provider together that could compete with the likes of a Huawei or an Ericsson?
I'm saying that it isn't zero, but there isn't anything like Huawei headquartered in the United States. And so if you're going to say no Huawei, you have to have an alternative. Now, you could say, look at our world-leading computing industry. Look at the companies that design chips and that manufacture them. Let's make sure that we have the world's best fab plants, that we have the best chip manufacturers. Let's look at those companies and encourage them with tax incentives and with procurement to do more in the United States. You could have that plan. That would make sense. That's what they do in China. That's what they do in Japan. You could have that plan. We need it.
I want to ask you, Huawei has launched a lawsuit based on its treatment in the U.S. Do you think there are any grounds there that it has been treated unfairly or illegally? I guess would be its claim.
You know, I haven't studied that lawsuit, and I wouldn't want to opine about that particular lawsuit. I'm happy to give you a view about the T-Mobile Sprint lawsuit, but the other one I would keep to I would just be prudent and say I really don't know.
Well, let's talk then about that merger. We have seen an increasing kind of view that if the consumer is well served, then it will be okay. Is that the right approach, or are we kind of going off track here a little bit by allowing some of these big companies to merge?
I think what's really important is to take a 10-year outlook. The Department of Justice in the United States has guidelines that look at the impact of mergers over the next 2 to 3 years. That's not long enough. You need about a 10-year outlook. You shouldn't be ignoring the impact of the merger over the some time period in the future, but you need a longer time period because that's how long these technology cycles actually run. In my view, the single most important thing to think about over the next 10 years is having 5G be a platform, almost like the atmosphere that we breathe, to be part of the ecosystem, so that there's just a prodigious increase in the amount of information that's collected, and then it needs to be aggregated at what's called the edge in places that don't even exist right now, called distributed computing locations. And if that happens, if 5G is everywhere, we will have what's called ambient computing, which will be the way that you'll appreciate computers. They'll be in the walls, they'll be installed inside of machinery. They'll be subcutaneous in some respects. And then there'll be aggregations of data at the edge in literally hundreds of thousands of locations. It means a 5-10x increase in the silicon market. It means tremendous innovation in computing. It means innovation in the design of networks. That's the 10-year future, not the 2-year future. That's the 10-year future.
Which argues presumably for fewer players with deep capital pockets, an ability to build it out really quickly.
Well, it certainly argues that we need at least 3 with deep capital pockets, and in my view, this merger is about whether we can have that third, the T-Mobile-Sprint deal. But I don't think it means there should always be only 3 or that any government should ever restrict it. I think the U.S. government also should be faulted for not putting out into the market a tremendous amount of spectrum for new companies and to unleash companies that are now hamstrung, that are now drowning in the regulatory swamp. These are in the C-band and the L-band, and C plus L equals 5G. That's the jargon here in Washington. But what it means is there's a whole bunch of spectrum that the government has not gotten into the private sector for use. And those regulatory problems need to be solved.
Are the regulators up to this task? I mean, you're describing when you think 10 years out and ambient computing and all of the issues that raises on top of the issues we've already surfaced that are beyond the FCC's purview in some cases, but things like the way, social media affects how we live.
Right.
Are regulators up to the task of staying on top of all of the issues that this will raise?
I know a lot of the regulators in this government. I guess I've known a lot of the regulators in all the governments for the last 30 years, and I've met them in Canada too, and they're easily smart enough. I'm going to tell something that is a lot easier for me to say when I'm not in the government than it was for me to hear when I was in the government. And here's what it is. You need backbone. You need to not worry about political cover or what people are going to say about you. You need to just go ahead and make the decisions. And yes, our regulators are smart enough. They just have to make the decisions.
All right, and just before I let you go, just for kind of transparency, do you do any consulting work for any of the big telecom players we've been talking about?
Yeah, Sprint. Sprint asked me if I would help them on this merger. I previously had always said no, but I think that the importance of 5G and the rise of distributed computing means that this merger is now important. So I changed my views and said I'd help them in any way that I could. I don't know if I've helped them very much, but I think that this is the right thing to do.